Walter Bingham was born nearly a century ago in Germany. He saw with his own eyes the buildup of hatred that led to the Holocaust, the worst crime in human history. Walter witnessed the book burning of 1933 and Kristallnacht in 1938, leaving Germany to the United Kingdom on the Kindertransport a few months later. Then he joined the British Army and fought the Germans. Today, we're honored to have the opportunity to listen to Walter's amazing life story at the age of 98. Hello, Walter.
Hello and shalom.
Great to have you with us. Please tell me a little bit about your life before the war.
Well, in 98, I was born in the beginning of January 1924 in a place called Karlsruhe, which is in southwest Germany. It was just a normal life in those days. It was the Weimar Republic in Germany. And then at the age of 6, I start going to school. And we didn't have a Jewish school. It was a ordinary basic school. And everything was wonderful at school. I was one of the boys and until Hitler came to power. And then the trouble started after Hitler came to power. And then comes my school life. And it wasn't very nice because I was the only boy in class usually. Sometimes there were 2 of us because there were not all that many Jews in the town. And if you know anything about bullying, they talk today, forget it, because what we Jewish boys had to suffer was far worse. I remember in one school there was at the end of the school yard was a wood, and there were iron bars fencing in the schoolyard. And I don't know how, and I can't believe it myself, but somehow when they were chasing me, I must have prized those half-inch thick iron bars apart to get through. I don't know how I did it. So it was that bad that you had to. Anyway, that was my school. That was the early school years.
Did you experience anti-Semitism in the streets, in the public sphere?
No. Subsequently, of course, when it progressed and Jews were no longer allowed to go to a cinema, to a theater, to a restaurant, everywhere were signs, Juden unerwünscht, Jews not wanted here, and it was printed in German, but in letters that resembled Hebrew print. And then, of course, you knew you couldn't go anywhere. That was just what I mentioned before, slow strangulation of life.
I want to take you now to November 9th, 1938, the night that is called Kristallnacht or Pogromnacht. Tell me about that night.
This Kristallnacht was well prepared. All the German officers had instructions what to do when they get the signal. Yeah. They were just waiting for the right time. And the right time was immediately after, I think Ernst von Rath died in the morning of the 9th of November. And then there was what you just described, Kristallnacht, the night from the 9th to the 10th. I was in Mannheim, in that town. I lived in the Jewish orphanage because that was the only place which was kosher. Mm. And I walked from the orphanage to the synagogue, and the school rooms were for this 9th school year were behind the synagogue. And as I got near, I felt the atmosphere, and I saw, and when I got there, I saw crowds, and then I saw that synagogue burning, and people standing around, and the fire service was there, of course, but not to douse the flames of the synagogue, but to cool the neighboring property. property that was so it shouldn't catch fire, German property. I went back, contacted my home and said, I want to come home. And my mother said, come. Now, if you ask me, what did you have for lunch yesterday? I'd have a hard time remembering, because the short-term memory is the one that fades when you get older. But I can tell you that I took the 322 diesel train that afternoon.
1,400 synagogues were burned that night. Stores have been vandalized and Jews were arrested and killed that night.
30,000 Jewish men were taken to concentration camps. And of course, all the synagogues in Germany, Austria, and the by then occupied part of Czechoslovakia, Sudetenland, were burned down.
You were one of the 10,000 Jewish children who were able to leave Germany after Kristallnacht on the Kindertransport. How did it feel to leave home?
That was a traumatic time. So my mother took me to the train. Now, your mother, I take it, imagine, heroes. Imagine you take your child. I was 15 and a half at the time, so I knew already why I was going. But you take and I was an only child, your only child to the train, send them away, and it was 5 minutes before war broke out. I left actually on the 25th of July 1939, and the war broke out 4 weeks later. Everybody knew it was going to be war, and it couldn't be any better for Jews if there's a war than it was by then, because it got successively worse. Imagine you take your only child to a train to send him far away, couldn't speak much the language. Now there were children of 4 who didn't know what was happening to them. Mummy, Mummy, I love you. They thought they're being punished. They're in the train and the mummy's outside. It very, very traumatic. I suppose they gave us chocolates and sandwiches or something to. For me, at that time, I must say, it was a mixed emotions. There was, of course, the sadness of leaving my mother. But going on a big international journey somewhere, I'd never been on such an international train. But that was very, very, very emotional. I mean, it sank in later. You wave goodbye by the windows, and the parents were standing on the platform, and my mother waving. I can't imagine how she felt when the train pulled out. I get goosebumps telling the story. I can't imagine how she felt when her only child went away. And she knew that it was going to be war. Everybody knew, and who knew what was going to be during the war.
What happened to your mother?
I must tell you, I was one of the very, very minute percentage who were reunited with their mother after the war.
Walter, arriving to the United Kingdom, what happened to you later?
Well, first of all, I went to this establishment which was effectively a kibbutz in England. Now, I was there for quite a long time, some years, and then I didn't agree with it anymore, and I left. And I went to London, and I went to work as a driver. Then I got a letter from the Polish government. Come and to the office, you have to go in the army, the Polish army. Well, I went there and I said, look, I'm not going into your army. First of all, I can't speak Polish. Secondly, I've never been to Poland. Thirdly, when the sergeant says turn left, I'll probably turn right. And I say, I'm not going. Said, okay, we'll see what we can do. And they then released me and said, oh, I'll go into the British Army. And the invasion started. And I went with a unit driving an ambulance, landed in the water. It was not on D-Day, it was a couple of days later.
You have received Medal of Honor from both the United Kingdom and France. You brought them today with you.
I have to show you here, yeah. So these are the medals. The first one is the military medal, the one for which I was given, and on the back it says for bravery in the field. That's important, that's why it's in the front. Then there's a France and Germany star, these are campaign ribbons. And the last one, it should be in the front, but because it's foreign, it's in the back, is the Légion d'honneur, which is the highest honor that the French can give you. The French can give to military or civilians any time. And they gave that to me, and I can tell you the story how that happened.
Can I take a look?
Those are the medals, yeah.
Thank you. If someone had told you that one day you will be interrogating the Nazi foreign minister Ribbentrop, what would your reaction have been?
Well, I wouldn't have thought of it. But this man, Joachim von Ribbentrop, who used to be the German ambassador to the Court of St. James's, that is to the United Kingdom, he then, as the war broke out, went back to Germany and he became foreign minister. And the foreign minister of Germany was obviously in charge of everything that was happened in the occupied territories, including that the Einsatzgruppen, the groups who did all the terrible things about rounding up Jews, etc., that they all did their job. So he knew what was going on. We looked up for Nazis after the war, and he was caught in Hamburg. And then he was dressed. His civilian clothes were taken off him. He was dressed in khaki. That's British uniform clothing, in case he carried a cyanide capsule. But they caught him and brought him, and I had an office in the what used to be the Nazi headquarters of the whole area, but became the intelligence office of British intelligence, counterintelligence actually. And there they brought him in, they got him, brought him there. Well, I had an office there, and they knew, my colleagues knew I was Jewish. And they thought I'll obviously be interested in him. And they brought him into my office, a very small office, you can imagine. And I was only this Nazi foreign minister and I. And they knew I wanted to know about the final solution. That was the only term at the time. And I began to ask him, so tell me, Herr Ribbentrop, what can you tell me about the final solution? We spoke in German and he spoke in English. I can't recall which language we used. He spoke very good English. And he looked me in the eye, and in that tone he said, I didn't know anything about that. It was the Führer, which is Hitler, ja, mach schon mal. And at that point I knew he's lying. I could have choked him. But as I was factually a British intelligence officer, and as such I had to be British, stiff upper lip. And all I could do was look at him and ask questions. And I said to him, I see, but I guess you now heard about it. How did you find out? and he said he read it in the newspaper. Now, the newspaper was one sheet, A3 or whatever they call it, printed on both sides, published by the British and German. And that is the Hamburger Nachrichtenblatt. And that is where he said he heard about the Holocaust. They made for me in Hamburg, the tailor made for me a civilian outfit. I didn't like to wear it because the material was so bad it itched. And I had all kinds of permits. Please, when you see him doing something, please refer to the area security office Hamburg before you do anything, and so on. And another interesting thing is, you remember that Hitler had this Mercedes with a low windscreen, and he used to stand in the car. I seen him twice from the balcony, and he had this, and this is how he went. Well, I had also a German police driver when I needed it, and a Mercedes like that, and I went down into Bavaria, do some business, and in this car. And I went through the first time I went into Karlsruhe after the war, I went in this Mercedes.
Are you concerned for the future of Holocaust memory as we see Holocaust denial and distortion on the rise?
We are living today in times like the 1930s. I really believe that. The only difference is that it cannot come to a final solution because we have the state of Israel. But everything else, the signs are exactly as they were, slowly, Jews being attacked in the streets, their shops being marked with the Magen David, Star of David. Everything is the same. And people are walking in the streets in different countries shouting Jew. We are absolutely today in the 1930s, and it is only because we have, thank God, this state of Israel, which is stronger than most people think, that it can never happen. The final solution can never happen. How this is going to play out, I don't know, because particularly now when the world is in economic crisis, it's a very good opportunity to blame it on someone.
Yeah.
And it is, one reads here and there, it is being blamed on the Jews. But the governments are not taking this seriously enough. We do.
Do you think anti-Semitism will ever go away?
Anti-Semitism is a very good answer to people's problems. Until Mashiach will come, it will go on. It's ingrained in history and the people. You have to blame someone. And governments don't want to blame themselves for any crisis they get into, so they blame the Jews. It's very easy, very simple. I'm proud to be a Jew.
If I would ask you to close your eyes for one moment and go back to one specific moment back then, what would it be?
Oh, undoubtedly it would be getting on the train and leaving my mother.
That's what I thought.
Undoubtedly. That was the most traumatic moment. One of the most dramatic moments. And it was, in fact, probably the most important and reuniting with her. You see, she left me as I said, relatively naive boy of 15 and a half. In those days, 15-and-a-half-year-old boys, certainly Jewish boys, were didn't know from all the things that the 15-year-olds do and know today. So I was relatively naive, but as I told you, streetwise. But she left me as that naive, relatively naive 15-and-a-half-year-old, and when we met, I was 22 and an experienced soldier who'd been through the battles. Yeah. What a gap. What a difference. 6 years. That was another important moment.
Thank you so much, Walter, for this fascinating conversation. I wish you health and that you keep smiling. Thank you.
It was a great pleasure to meet you and to relate that story, because it's very important. There will soon not be anybody alive who can bear witness. It'll be read in books, and that's not quite the same.